Welcome to this masterclass on generative AI for open education. We are very excited to be able to present to you on initiatives that we have been working on in generative AI and in open education. And we want to extend our sincere thanks to UNESCO and to the Global Learning House for inviting us to take this opportunity to share our work and our thoughts on these areas and the implications for education now and in the future. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Global Learning House, this is an initiative from UNESCO that came out of COVID and was designed to support and mobilize international solidarity and looking at the needs that emerged around innovative solutions to learning with our varying degrees of how learning is delivered, in particular for the most disadvantaged learners worldwide. So my name is Jeff Gumis, and I am a senior technical advisor at World Education, and I'm also the open education lead at World Education. And World Education, which is a global non-NGO, works in many areas. We focus our work primarily in the United States, but we have been extending some of this work internationally into other countries. And the Open Education Initiative of World Education is called Crowded Learning. So you're going to hear us maybe interchange these two terms, but we work at World Education, and our Open Education Initiative that we focus on is the Crowded Learning Initiative. And my colleague.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Riggs, and I am a technical advisor at World Education. And I also help with the Crowded Learning Initiative in our open education work, as well as leading our AI for Learning and Work initiative, in which we build capacity for AI literacy. And we also think about how to advocate for and evaluate AI tools and infrastructure. So we are bringing together our two little passions, Jeff and I, with open education and AI today. Thanks for joining us. So one thing we wanted to say right up front is that we know that conversations around artificial intelligence and open education can be fraught with emotion and feelings and strong feelings, because both of these areas have serious implications for equity and have important ethical considerations. So these are important topics to people, and we acknowledge that. And we want to say that we are both educators. We view our role as sharing knowledge and experience and what we've seen in the field. And so we are here to explore this intersection of AI and open education with you, and we want to hear from you. We'll have opportunities throughout to do that. We are not computer scientists, and we have yet to do research in the area of artificial intelligence, and so we don't want to misrepresent our work. We are definitely exploring these things with educators. We've done a lot of great work, and we're probing artificial intelligence promise and pitfalls. But today we will talk about formal research that we're doing in open education and exploratory work that we're doing in artificial intelligence, all working toward our mission, which is equity in education. So we're starting with this question around what is openness. We'll be talking today about generative AI for open education and where it fits in that puzzle. Undoubtedly, it can be used as a tool to support open education, especially in the curation, adaptation, and creation of open educational resources. It's important, though, to set out our vision and values when we think about experimenting with new and experimental and powerful technologies. So open education is a movement that is grounded in this bigger concept of openness that has had an impact and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people in different domains. And what it means for us is that knowledge is a public good. This is a shared belief that we have with many in the open education movement, and that access to free and quality learning is a human right. So we are invested in exploring how open resources and processes can have a positive impact on education as a whole, and again, especially with equity in education. So today we'll talk a lot about open educational resources, or OER, and how our work with educators and OER might be impacted by advances in generative artificial intelligence. So for those of you joining who don't yet know what generative artificial intelligence is, first I'll just say the buzzword that most people do know, ChatGPT. And then I'll say it's a field of machine learning that's resulted in really incredible capabilities to generate media, code, text, images that have never before been seen. And so it's a application of machine learning in which a machine is taking a lot of data, mushing it all together with a lot of different parameters and rules, and then spitting out something that is original. So you can enter a prompt. With most of these tools, you enter a prompt, and the prompts can be in a lot of different forms, depending on the tool that you use and how it has integrated generative AI. So some are text prompts, and some are, you can also upload PDFs, you can also use audio. And as generative AI advances, the ability to enter in a different variety of prompts continues to expand. And so after you enter a prompt in one of these formats, you also get an output. And just as the ability to prompt in different ways is expanding, also the ability to elicit different types of output is expanding. So you can currently get output that would look like text, images, code, videos, and more. So to give a little example of what that might look like, right? This is text that I've entered into a tool called ChatGPT. Write a song about the intersection of generative AI and open education. I will spare you guys. I won't sing the song, but I've already started putting a melody to it. Don't doubt that. So you start with a text prompt and you get something like this: in the realm of endless code where minds collide, generative whispers, breath, dreams they confide, blah, 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 blah. So within the click of a button, in a matter of seconds, I can generate a song. I'm sure you've seen many examples like this one. And to look at a different type of media, I can prompt with text, requesting an image that shows two parallel paths that come to an intersection with symbols over here and symbols over there. And what will result is a decent image that I can use at the start of a PowerPoint, like the one that we use for today's presentation, not without its flaws, but colorful enough to add some decorative elements to my presentation. So the question here is, what does all of this mean for open education? If everyone increasingly has the ability to produce their own resources and media at the snap of their fingers, basically, or the click of a button, and within a matter of seconds or minutes, what does that mean for a movement that is largely based in the sharing, generation, reuse of open educational resources? And begs the question, do we still need open education? Well, we believe that, of course, we still need the values that are associated with openness and open education. And we think that there are ways that we can maintain our values while we apply the use of generative AI meaningfully in the use of OER. So when we think about applying generative AI, we think about the crowded learning values, and we question first transparency. So how can we be honest about when we use AI, and how do we foster and advocate for transparency in education and the application of educational technologies? And then we think next about our value for collaboration. How do we avoid pushing educators into silos where they are churning out content quickly, but with little collaboration and knowledge or resource sharing? How do we promote, in terms of access, how do we promote AI-enabled tools that are accessible and also contribute to accessibility of open educational resources? And finally, there is efficacy, which is very, very important when we talk about generative AI. So how do we evaluate resources generated using AI or AI-enabled tools and ensure that they are actually advancing what we would consider to be effective education and meaningful education rather than diluting these resources. So these are the values that we are keeping at the forefront. So what you'll see today when we talk about the use of generative AI, we're going to be talking a lot about free tools, tools that are accessible to educators and easy to use in terms of how we apply generative AI to open educational resources.
The implications of this are broad and vast, and many of them unknown. And so we really do want to make sure that we are considering our values before we even engage in using artificial intelligence. And those are going to evolve over the course of our use, and the more that we learn about what it can do, what it can't do, and how we engage with humans in the process of leveraging the technology itself, which is a big focus of what we're now going to walk through. So as we said at the start of this, Crowded Learning is World Education's Open Education Initiative. And I'm just going to do a very brief overview of what that looks like in practice in terms of where we've been, what we're doing, and where we're going, where we see the world of open education resources. So Crowded Learning was founded 6 years ago now in 2017. And our focus was really on recognizing that there are lots of high quality open education resources available, but there was underuse of them, particularly within, again, the focus that Rachel and I have predominantly within our work, the US adult education system. And so our aim was to increase both awareness of open education resources that are available and access to those resources. And over the past 6 years, we've been evolving and experimenting and looking at how can we solve that problem, which is the goal of most nonprofits. And we have really narrowed that down into two main activities that we are doing. One is focused on processes around open education resources. So thinking and considering ways that we can engage educators in the service of building OER while they are learning about the use and design of OER. And so we do that through a process called the EdTech Makerspace, which we'll look at in a second. But then recognizing that just having high quality content available to you is not enough. One, teachers need training in how to use those resources, but they also need tools that help them actually find and retrieve high quality open education resources in a manner that is not as time intensive as doing a Google search and then having to sift through all of the things that are out there. So what are tools that we can develop or point people to that ease this process by which teachers are actually finding, organizing, and sharing the open education resources? And we really see this as a symbiotic relationship, which has evolved into what we call the crowded learning ecosystem. So the processes that were mentioned earlier, as I said, is our EdTech Makerspace service learning professional development model. And that model is focused on engaging teachers in the curation, the adaptation, and the creation and alignment of open education resources. And in that process, developing expertise in how to do those things effectively and how they can leverage those open education resources with their learners. And we have focused our tool development on actually designing and building an application, called SkillBlocks. And SkillBlocks is a tool that supports the process of open education retrieval and sharing. It is a free learning platform in which thousands of open education resources and free resources that are not open but freely available have been curated and aligned to skills that ease the process of teachers being able to find those activities, add them to a skill block, remix them in a manner that makes sense for their learners, and then share that with their learners or other educators. And as we engage teachers in this process of generating open education resources, those resources go into the Skill Blocks platform. So the platform is as good as the resources that are in it, and we're engaging teachers in the process of building the library of open activities that are in there. So as we've been experimenting with how to use this tool and how to engage teachers in the development of resources that go into the tool, what we've identified are kind of 4 core elements that are needed in order for sustainable open education resource use. And we've applied this nationally here in the United States through the activities that Rachel and I are going to be talking about today. We've applied this internationally. That's why I was excited to see someone from St. Lucia, because we've worked in international areas where there was a focus on increasing the availability of open education resources. And through that particular project is where we really identified these 4 components. That it starts with knowing what skills you are actually aligning open education resources to. And so through our makerspace, we run curation activities to help teachers take existing OER and align them and curate them to, say, a skills framework or a standards framework. But again, just having those resources is not enough. Teachers actually need training in the educational technologies that they will use to either share those resources with students and implement them and integrate them into their day-to-day instruction, or training in designing open education resources that they might use. And so that's another component. So if we know the skills that are important to students and important to instructors, the next step in focusing our OER efforts is where are the resource gaps in those areas? You might have great curriculum in one particular subject area or a great resource that hits at one particular set of skills, but there might be other areas where there's a lack of resources. So if we identify where there are gaps, how can we engage teachers in the generation of open education resources, which might be finding existing resources or creating new resources to address those gaps? And then finally, how do we facilitate OER use? So we have a tool called Skill Blocks that is designed to support that, to support the finding and remixing of open education resources, but we recognize there are others. So we are applying our processes and our tool Skill Blocks to the problem, but we know there's other partners, even one within the Global Learning Hub that we're going to actually be sharing their work today that does this. And so what we're going to be walking through now is on the left-hand side, these open and human processes that we've begun engaging and been engaging with teachers through crowded learning in the generation of open education resources through our service learning model. And on the right-hand side, this is the image that Rachel generated and looking at AI. And so what are we doing in resource generation through crowded learning? Where are we recognizing successes in that process? And where are we recognizing challenges? And how can we then leverage this technology that is now available to us to address some of those challenges, which is what technology is in general. It is designed to help make us more efficient. And so we're focusing our energy on artificial intelligence today on making us more efficient in the process of generating and expanding access to quality open education resources.
So we're, like Jeff said, we're going to talk about what we've been learning and exploring. And so what we have definitely learned is that teachers are highly motivated when we put these 3 things together in teacher training. One is a contribution to the field. And this is what we consider to be the service of our service learning opportunities like the EdTech Makerspace. Teachers are very motivated to generate resources that can be widely shared and that are reusable for other teachers. Also, the learning component. Teachers are motivated to adopt new technologies, new skills, and new practices. And then finally, the collaboration we've also found to be highly motivating for teachers to meet people who are working in different contexts than them, learn from them, to meet people who are working the same context and collaborate and co-design with them. So these are the 3 main components of all of our engagement with teachers. when we do those trainings with teachers, we're focused on 3 core activities within the open educational resource generation aim. So the first one is around adapting and remixing content when there is content that exists, but it's not exactly optimal for use. Maybe it's not readily usable or accessible. And so thinking about engaging teachers and taking resources that already exist and adapting them or remixing them so that they're more ready to use. And then there's the creation of new content when there is an actual full gap in resources to address a particular topic, or that includes is delivered in a certain type of media. Those full gaps where we have to create completely original content. And then finally, the curation of existing content. This is when there are resources that are available, but they may not be organized in a way that makes them easily retrievable for educators. And that's what the curation is about. So when we talk, Jeff and I today, Jeff will basically be talking about our human work. So this is work that we are doing actively with educators in a research study to explore how we can make OER easier to find and use for educators. And then I will be chiming in with our exploratory work around how we can make better use of teachers' time and expertise as we integrate generative AI into the educational ecosystem. And so we're going to talk about what we're seeing, what we're learning in terms of making OER more usable and discoverable. And then I will add what ways that we see that generative AI could accelerate certain processes to assist teachers, save them some time, and also think about putting a heavier emphasis on their expertise and the unique skills that they bring to the table. So when we talk about the research that we are doing, the research study is called TSTM Skill Blocks, and it's funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. This is our timeline. So what we've been doing is we've been engaging teachers since June of 2022 in EdTech maker spaces, and that helps us understand the supports for effective OER curation and design. And then starting from September and going into May of next year, we are building features into our tool called Skill Blocks that support the search, evaluation, organization, and sharing of OER. And then we will do a usability feasibility study and randomized control trial to understand the core use cases and impacts of using skill blocks to share, reuse, and adapt OER. And all of this study is based around a certain framework that is known in adult literacy education as teaching skills that matter. And so we're examining this use of OER and optimization of OER and training of teachers within the context of a specific instructional framework.
All right, so now we're going to actually walk through the 3 buckets of EdTech makerspace processes that Rachel mentioned: adapting, creating, and curating OER. So in each one of these instances, I'm going to share what it is and why it's needed, and examples of our work prior to this research that have led us to being able to apply this research grant to understand how to be more effective in each of these areas. So the first is adapting and remixing content. So this is scenarios in which there may be suitable resources out there, but they're not necessarily suitable for a particular context or a particular learner type. So that suitability might be culturally relevant content. It might be age-relevant content. In the United States, we focus, again, on adult basic education. So you may have a learner who's at a 3rd grade reading level, and there's lots of 3rd grade reading material out there, but the context of that reading material is certainly not necessarily suitable for an adult. And so how do we actually adapt and adjust that to make it more relevant and suitable? The accessibility and usability of resources is another key area where we might adapt. A lot of times we'll see things developed in, say, PDF format. And one of the questions that I saw is, how can we make OER more reusable? So here's a great example. Don't share things as PDFs. A PDF is great because I can look at it, but need really expensive software in order to adapt that resource or adjust it in any way that's going to be meaningful for my students. So if I have to update the reading level, maybe bump it up or bump it down, I need to copy paste all of that text, as opposed to if that reading was shared as a Google Doc or an open text format, I'd be able to dive right into that text and make those adjustments. And so that's one thing. Mobile friendliness is another, when we're talking about students who might not have access to laptops or desktop computers. And then granularity is a big area of focus for us, because the open education movement has been really extensive in the higher education world here in the US and internationally. And predominantly because of the fact that there's an exorbitant cost of textbooks for college students. And so there's been a lot of activity in open education resource, but the results of that in higher education tend to be full textbooks and full courses. And I might not want that entire course. There might be just certain aspects of it, or certain even lessons or skills or activities within that might be useful to me as a teacher who's not teaching a college course. And so how do we figure out what is the right level of granularity of the resources that we're sharing? So examples of this might be adjusting content for readability or relevance. Again, as I mentioned, bumping up or down the reading level depending on the students that you're working with, or the digitization of content that might not be currently digital. And so the whole EdTech Makerspace process was born out of the pandemic, actually, where we recognized that there were some really high quality resources that were out there, in particular, a leveled reading library that was developed where there's 300 stories that are at different learning levels, or reading levels, excuse me, for adult learners. So it hit suitability, it hit relevance for learners, and it was online. But the activities that you see on the right here was this static resource. It wasn't a PDF, it was a Word document. But most learners in our context don't tend to have Microsoft Word. And they don't tend to have a computer where they would be doing anything meaningful within this Word document in terms of completing these exercises. So our first makerspace focused on designing interactive open education resources by adapting the static OER that had really good activities within it. So we trained teachers in tools like Quizlet, where they could take the vocabulary and design interactive vocabulary study sets. We trained teachers in using Google Forms, and then they took the comprehension questions from this reading activities and they digitized it so that there is a shareable quiz for each of the readings that students could do on a mobile device and get immediate feedback. And then we trained them in a tool called Wakelet, where they pulled all these things together so that the quiz, the vocabulary activity, and the reading were all together in one place. So in our IES research, we have been focusing specifically on granularity. And again, I talked about in higher education, lots of open education resources are designed as courses. But in this teaching skills that matter approach that Rachel mentioned earlier, all of the OER that have been generated as part of that are PDFs, and they are full lesson plans. And so here's a lesson plan on the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment here in the United States. And there's a really great activity on page 5 that gets at identifying different ways in which First Amendment rights are being exercised based on different movements here in the United States. And then it's not till page 10 of this PDF that you actually get to see what that activity looks like, again, as a PDF. And so we've engaged teachers in Makerspace to adapt these lesson plans and design granular activities that could be shared as is that get at this same skill. And so one teacher decided to use Google Slides to take different images from different movements, such as protesting on vaccination or civil rights or gun control or women's rights, and designing a slides presentation. Now, this slides presentation is something that others can adapt. It's something that I can use more flexibly. I could use it here right now and do it in a remote setting. I could do it synchronously in an in-person setting by projecting it, where students can be discussing what they see, what the movement is, what they know about it. So it becomes a much more flexible activity that's easier to find, and it's pretty obvious what students are doing in it without having to sift through this 5-page lesson plan. We could also take the original worksheet and again, make it a Google Doc so that somebody could actually adjust it to suit their needs, a ready-made resource that could be used as is, but it could be adapted because it's been recreated using a technology that is more open than a PDF. And so all of these activities then go into our SkillBlocks platform so that teachers could find the original lesson plan if they want to see the full scale lesson, but they also see these smaller scale, more granular activities that they could use as is, or they could remix into their own lesson. And that's what adapting content looks like. So we see the immediate benefits where teachers are learning how to use these ed tech tools, and so they're developing their skills in those areas. They become ambassadors for the content that they're creating, and they recognize the value of thinking about reusability as they design and adapt OER. But we recognize also that that localization and the process of doing so is great in theory, and sometimes it's easy, where it might be just a small adaptations make this something that's more reusable. But sometimes we recognize that it's easier to start from scratch. And so how can we leverage artificial intelligence to support that process of localization?
What we are looking at is how can generative AI be used for adaptation, for this process of localizing and making something more granular. So if we look at the 12-page PDF lesson plan as an artifact that is so high quality and excellent, but not giving us what we want in terms of reusability, the ideal would be that artificial intelligence could take this lesson plan, hi robot, and it could adapt it, giving us changes that address the suitability, so the level or the context, changes that address the usability, so actual readiness to deliver this to learners in a variety of modalities, asynchronous, synchronous, on different devices, and so on and so forth. It would be able to adapt this and give us the granularity, right? To give us a single activity or to parse this apart. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? But we see is that if we look at the different, now I'm going to talk about different tools specifically, and I want to just address the fact that I have chosen these tools based off of 3 key areas when I think about teachers actually applying the use of them, which are cost, skills, and time. And so there are certainly, we could make more investments in any one of those 3 areas if we go to different tools, no doubt, and we could probably do a better job of automating this process. But if we want to think about tools that are free, tools that don't require a whole new skill set for teachers, we want to actually save them time. We don't want to add a lot of new time. Yeah, that was a quiz actually. So what I did was I took, if we look at a 12-page PDF, what we can do using Anthropic's Claude, which is a chatbot, you can upload PDFs to Claude and it will essentially extract the text from that. So I can ask Claude to adjust the level of this PDF. And what will result are, what did result are first some suggestions for how I could adjust the level. And then I continued to interact and I eventually got it to produce a lesson plan, but never to the level of detail of that original lesson plan. And so it wasn't hugely successful in actually adapting the full lesson plan for this new learner level, but it did give me a good starting point. Then if we look at usability, where we want to maybe think about, okay, how can I get an activity from here that's like ready to use with learners? And so what I did then was I used a tool called Bard. And in Bard, I can provide a link to the PDF and Bard will be able to ingest it. And then I can ask it to turn certain activities or something from the lesson plan into a quiz or a worksheet or something that is more usable with learners. So I did that and asked it to produce a quiz for me, and I get this, which is text-based. I can't yet have Bard generate a Google form for me or an actual quiz, but I can at least get the text that gives me, again, a starting point to then create something. And then if we look at the third area of granularity, I can ask ChatGPT with an extension called AI PDF or a plugin called AI PDF. I can, again, put the PDF into ChatGPT and ask it to extract a more granular activity from the lesson plan. And it will result, again, in a lot of text like this that is a great starting point for me. But if I'm really evaluating what I have generated from using these generative AI tools in terms of adapting this 12-page PDF, when it comes to the relevance, it's still, as a teacher, I really have to go through and evaluate, did it really target the level that I was hoping for in the adaptation? When it comes to usability, I still, as a teacher, have to have the skills to transfer that text into an ed tech tool like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms to deliver it to my students. When it comes to the granularity, I still, as a teacher, again, have to create some kind of artifact. In this case, I took the text and put it into a worksheet in Canva to deliver that to learners. So I would say generative AI helped me along the way, but there are still a lot of skills and there's time that I need to really make that content something that is usable.
All right, so now we're going to get into the next activity, which is creating new content. And so again, when thinking about why this is needed, there just is a lack of content. So if there are no open education resources or accessible resources available for a particular area, you need to start from scratch. And we also recognize that even in some areas, there might be content, say, for digital skills. There's lots of content out there for digital skills, but guess what? Digital skills are changing. That's why we're here today. We're talking about artificial intelligence, which a year ago, we really weren't talking about. And so there's a whole set of new skills that people need in this area, and a lack of content related to those skills. And the examples that we've been focused on here is contextualizing math problems to authentic workplace tasks. So again, there's lots of math content that is available that's free and open for K-12. But getting into word problems in contexts that are relevant to an adult, there's just not a lot of that. And so that is not something you can't adapt counting puppies and kittens into a workplace problem. That's not that easy to adapt. So you do have to start from scratch. Or activities that don't just focus on digital skills, but also focus on digital resilience, being confident and being strategically competent in how to use technology, and confident as well. So one of the makerspaces that we ran previously was teachers looked at what does digital resilience mean, and thinking about you need to have the foundation of the vocabulary to talk about technology in order to be resilient. And so they designed and created a set of vocabulary slides around about 300 plus digital skills terms, where they found images that were openly licensed, where they created sentences so that students could understand it in context. And they added audio files that so students could hear the words. And then they created original activities that engage learners in the vocabulary so that they recognize things such as common symbols and terms that they're going to see in a variety of digital applications, hence building digital resilience. Creating activities from scratch is a hard thing to sustain because we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every single time we're doing it. So in our research, we have been focusing with teachers on how do we create sustainable practices around creating new open education resources. And so we started with a tool called the Digital Learning Selector from the New South Wales Department of Education, that's in Australia. And they have this great template library of what I call EdTech routines, which are high use and high impact classroom activities that you can do on a repeat basis. So it's part of a regular classroom activity that every time you do it, it's not new to students because they understand what is needed in order to complete the activity. So things like KWL charts or exit tickets and reflections are things you can do on a regular basis. Students become comfortable with that process. And designing those open education resources becomes a function of plugging in the new content based on whatever the topic is that's being studied. So for example, in our makerspace, 2 teachers found these 2 routines, a think pair share and a problem-solving process called polio questioning. And they designed original activities, created new activities. So here's one on understanding and categorizing that students do together on credit ratings and understanding what good, bad, and no credit is and what the implications are for people. And here's an activity that one designed on budgeting. So a problem-solving process that takes understanding taxes, and that taxes come out of your paycheck. So using both math and financial literacy skills in order to solve this problem. And again, all of these resources that get created go into our Skill Blocks application, organized and aligned to both financial literacy skills and math skills that folks can search within the platform. Benefits of this all, again, include that teachers get these skills in designing activities, and considering accessibility becomes a big focus with these types of makerspaces, and reusability. And they also think about, instead of trying to do something incredibly time intensive every time you use technology, thinking of ways to be more practical and strategic about their technology use, so that again, they're creating new content, but they're not doing it and having to reinvent the wheel of the type of activity they're doing each time. And so as part of this process, makers use an activity design guide. So they're completing a checklist as they're creating these things, so that they're creating things that are reusable because they've taken into account things like accessibility and open access. And they develop new skills. We get teachers at all different levels. And when they come in, they might already have ed tech skills and they just want to create and share. And some teachers have very limited ed tech skills. And even those teachers are able to be successful in this model because of the supports that we provide. But we recognize that this building from scratch is still time consuming.
Okay, so yes, creating original content. And this, I mean, to me is the most exciting area for when we talk about like, okay, how can generative AI really support us as teachers in our practice of developing open educational. So what we did was we actually did a structured training called Camp GPT that draws from a lot of the things that we do in EdTech makerspaces, but was a little more open-ended because of the newness of the technology. And we gathered teachers together to contribute to do that service part of the service learning. So they were contributing their prompts, reflections, and insights from their interactions with different generative AI-enabled tools to also learn together. So we taught them different tools, different prompting strategies, and then we also integrated a lot of education around AI ethics and equity in AI. And then of course, collaboration. So like everything, we had them showcase what they were doing. We had them react to each other, have chances to interact with each other, and so on and so forth. So in Camp GPT, we had these camp rules, and we were thinking about how can we, in a fun and low stakes way, because of the newness and kind of intimidation around AI, integrate some really important concepts like strategic ed tech integration and AI ethics into the training. So we had these camp rules, goals before tools, which basically teaches instructors to set out the strategy and purpose for using technology before integrating it into what they're doing, explore and have fun, because we want teachers to have the confidence to experiment and not worry about messing up, and avoid bugs, because we want them to be aware about the pitfalls of generative AI technologies. And finally, remember to buddy up. And going back to this concept of collaboration, which we believe to be like a really important part of the human-centeredness when we talk about AI implementation. So what we did was we got them together and we were able to work together on coming out with these really authentic use cases. We are publishing all of their work in what we're calling the Open Prompt book, which will come out next week. But this is just one example of what an educator did in Camp GPT. What we learned from gathering all of them together was, first of all, how do teachers want to use generative AI in their work in developing educational resources? We like this approach of letting it come from them rather than us dictating how it should be integrated into their practice. And then concrete examples. We were able to see, we all shared with each other what prompt frameworks we were using, what we're including in our prompt, whether we were doing prompt, really detailed prompts, or more of a prompt training or a dialogue. So that gave us insights into kind of how teachers interact with these tools. And then finally, we're publishing all of these as open prompts, not all of them, actually. I should say that we're publishing a selection of the prompts in the prompt book as what we're calling open prompts. And the idea behind this is to get at, when we're creating new content using generative AI, how do we go a step further in that reuse and reusability? So how do we go beyond just, oh, I created a rubric or a checklist, and now I'm going to share it with you in a Google Doc so you can reuse it? There's a step before that in the source of that creation, which is the prompt and the dialogue. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be sharing links so that people can go in and continue to interact in their own accounts, right, with a chatbot building off of the original prompt that an educator gave. So we're very, very excited to dig further into this concept of how do we use generative AI and really create a community around it and build on one another's work, rather than all of us popping up with our 10,000 different checklists and great stuff that we're using with learners. How do we create a community and collaboration around that? And then, another thing that we saw in Camp GPT is that this is a new technology, but they are the same principles. So Jeff talked about the activity design checklist, and everything that we think about when we think quality OER design applies still when we're using generative AI to create new content. So when we think about the bias that people talk about a lot in AI algorithms and AI output, showing an example of Padlet's I Can't Draw. When you ask it for an adult learning math, the adult is a white male. When you ask it for an adult woman learning basic math, again, they are all white women. So, there's a real bias coming through so clearly there. And when we are using some really quality design criteria that are intended for quality output, we can analyze the output of AI and the materials that we pull from AI into our OER in the same way that we evaluate our own design of OER separate from generative AI. So new technology, same principles. And what we learned through that process, it was so insightful, and we're actually running more Camp GPTs. We love it, and teachers love it. We had a 100% unanimous in our poll when we asked them if they would participate in more. It was yes, 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 yes. So it's been really valuable to us and to them, I think. And so what we learned is that using these tools as individual users is a great starting point. So it's no teacher came out of that with like, okay, I've got all my lessons ready to go for the semester, but it gave them new ideas and new things to consider as they were creating educational resources. So they really found it valuable as a starting point to then go back and edit and refine what they got. We also found that in terms of skills, it was really easy for them to adopt these tools because it's a text-based system, right? So if you can type something into a prompt, and you can read the output, then you are well on your way to actually using that tool to accelerate what you're doing. It's a little more difficult when we're generating media and then having to remix that media. So those video generators, audio generators, and things like that, it was hard to pull all of that together into something really meaningful. We still recognize we want to work more on open pedagogy and thinking about learner voices and how we can bring learners into this process, into the use of the tools, and to the decisions around AI and how it's used in education, and really amplify what they are doing with generative AI. So that's like one area we have on the horizon, and it's a priority for us. We also recognize that there's still a lot to be done in terms of coming up with a really coordinated effort to build on each other's work when it comes to using generative AI, instead of diluting things by breaking into different silos and skimming off of the top of a data set that a foundation model has been trained on.
All right, so very limited time, as Rachel said, so I'll fly through something that I think is a bit more obvious, and this is content curation. So curating resources is when there are ample resources out there, but it is a time-intensive process for teachers to go to this website, this website, this website, to see if there are activities related to a skill that they might want. And across those websites, there's a recognition that different resources are designed differently for different learner types. There's different delivery of content, and there's no one-size-fits-all model for that. And so how can we organize resources so that I can look for a particular skill and then see what's available and what variety is out there and find the right resource for my learners? And examples of that in Khan Academy, one of the most widely known open education resources out there, but again, it's organized in K-12. And not to say adult ed competencies and skills frameworks, or digital skills OER, lots of resources out there that are designed to develop digital skills. And the example that we've recently done, or in the past couple of years as part of one of our other initiatives, is building a digital skills library, recognizing that there is great content out there. These are two examples. One is from our US Public Library Association, one is from Google. So one is a more basic foundational understanding of the concepts, and one is more project-based in application of the concepts. And by curating these resources to skills, in this case, both of these align to a skill called send and receive emails, I can search by that skill and then find different resources from different places and figure out which one is most suited for what I want to do. So how we're experimenting with this with our educators in the EdTech makerspace is we've been going through a two-part process, because curation is not just aligning things, but it's first evaluating the resource to see if it's worth aligning. And so we developed an evaluation guide and worked teachers through the process of evaluating resources. And then for those resources that we wanted to continue with, aligning the activities within to our subject area frameworks in civics and financial literacy, health literacy, and in workplace preparation. Now, that digital skills alignment activity that I showed in the previous slide, that resulted in 1,800 OER aligned to a digital skills framework. Nothing newly created, just organized in a way so people could go to specific skills and find activities. 1,800 of them, in fact, but organized in a more sensible manner. This activity that we did with two different makerspaces resulted in over 800 activities aligned to these four areas. So just a set of makerspaces resulting in over 2,500 resources that are now just curated in a manner that makes it easier for people to find, because they first start with the skill that they're looking to teach. So benefits obviously are the generation of resources. The curation process is the one that actually yields the most in terms of our three different makerspace processes. And the evaluation part of that equips teachers with not just if they're generating OER, but even if they're looking at anything they might want to use with learners, how to evaluate that to see if it's a resource they should be using. And we recognize also that the immersion in the skills as teachers are curating and aligning content is really beneficial for increasing their subject matter expertise. But again, time is the biggest factor here in sifting through these lists and lists and lists of activities, and then these lists and lists of frameworks to figure out which activities align to which skills is very time consuming. So it's also one that doesn't necessarily apply to all skills frameworks. So we, in our work, are curating things to the frameworks that we're using in our Skill Blocks platform. Send and receive email is just one skill in there. And here are about 70 resources that align to that particular skill. In the US, we have a digital skills assessment called North Star, And there's 8 different standards that deal with just more granular elements of sending and receive email. So I might have something in skill blocks that aligns to send and receive email, but does that activity deal with adding an attachment? Does that activity deal with opening an email and downloading an attachment from that, which is the more granular skill over here? So we've only gotten so far with curating to this, and there's a crosswalk needed. But that crosswalk is going to be really difficult because you have to actually really recurate the activities to North Star. And going in the opposite direction, a framework that might be more familiar to others is the DigComp 2.2, which is developed by the European Commission. And here's a competency in that framework interacting through digital technologies. Well, that's email is just one component of that. So now you have to go in the reverse direction and recognize that this is one skill, but in skill blocks, there's 10 skills that deal with variations on what it means to communicate with digital communications. So again, it's almost like an entirely new curation activity would have to be done for each of these different frameworks. We've only aligned to a single framework that we're using. One of the Global Learning House partners that I mentioned earlier, Learning Equality, has been tackling this problem with generative AI. And so they've first been working in countries that might have standards frameworks that aren't even digitized to digitize those so that we're able to do this curation and alignment and tagging of resources to those standards. But then they ran a competition actually with edtech developers to design recommender engines, basically, that could take a digitized framework, could look at a repository of resources and how those are tagged, and make recommendations of which of those resources align to those particular standards. And to a question that was asked earlier, I encourage you to look up Learning Equality, because they do focus predominantly on offline resources for under-resourced countries that might not have full-time digital access. So the great thing about this now is that instead of having to do this manual curation, you can start by using the recommender engine. And then again, the human aspect of that comes into verifying, does this activity, in this case, angle and plane figures, align to that particular skill? So there's still a human component, and there's still that benefit of the human generating subject matter expertise. But the initial step of doing the alignment doesn't have to be done. It's more vetting and validating that alignment and seeing, does this actually comprehensively cover that particular standard?
So, we still are looking at how do we maintain a foundation in our values. We're looking at what are the benefits and drawbacks of generative AI in this open education ecosystem. How do we continue to support reusability and coordination and collaboration? How will we amplify learners' voices and integrate open pedagogy into this process? And how will we ensure that there is a critical evaluation of the efficacy of the application of generative AI for open education?